Welcome back, everyone. This is Money Mixology. I'm your host, Jason. Today's show is going to take a slightly different tone or tenor than some of the episodes that have come before. When I first started the show, I mentioned to you that one of my experiences and my background, my technical expertise is in the financial therapy side, which is very different than the approach we've taken so far on the show. We tried to keep it really lighthearted. We've talked about some of the, tips and tricks to make your financial picture better, using some of the behavioral stuff that your brain is doing, understanding some of the little quirks that your brain goes through. We talked about some of the mental accounting, and then we talked about some of the habit building, things like that were more lighthearted and gave an approach to the topic that allowed you to sort of maybe chuckle a little bit and laugh at yourself a little bit and realize some of the crazy stuff you were doing. And that's all really valuable. And that will always probably be the primary focus of the channel because it does give some entertainment value to the whole process. However, there is another side to this entire world of financial psychology and behavioral finance, and that really is the therapy side. And understanding that occasionally things can go kind of off the rails in some really bad ways. So I do want to highlight, and we're actually going to do a two-part series on this topic. This episode today, and then next week's episode will follow up with the second part of the conversation. If I was to tell you that there is something that 40% of people in the country are doing if they're in a relationship, and that 16% or almost 1 in 5 divorces have this thing as a major factor or a major driving reason behind the divorce, what would your initial thought be as to what that is? And my suspicion is your answer is probably half correct. You probably you may have used the term cheating, or it would be more properly called infidelity. And the reality is that's true, but what I'm actually talking about is financial infidelity. This is a style of being unfaithful that impacts the finances of the family in some way. This can show out in a lot of different styles of cheating. And again, we're talking about financial infidelity here. So there can be hidden bank accounts. There could be debts that were undisclosed prior to a relationship or debts that are accumulated during the relationship that you don't share with your partner. And therefore, you kind of put the financial situation of the family in a bad place. There could be literal illegal activity going on where it doesn't impact the spouse or the partner in a financial way directly. What it's doing is putting the relationship in harm's way because obviously if you break the law, there can be massive consequences to that. It could be something where you or your partner are supporting another person without the permission, knowledge, agreement, however you want to frame it, of the partner. And we'll get into some of those examples as we talk through this a little bit. But those are ways in which you can be unfaithful with money or to the money finances of the family. And it can be really, really harmful to the relationship and what ends up happening. Now, interestingly enough, there are some statistics out there about how each gender tends to do the financial infidelity, which is odd that we do it differently, but it's something to at least be aware of. Males tend to lie, hide, be deceitful, whatever term you'd like to use, with entertainment and technology. So either they have a gambling addiction that they're not disclosing or that they're spending more money on gambling than their partner is really aware of. So that'd be the entertainment side. This has become a massive problem with young males. Gambling addiction is the fastest growing addiction for young males in this country, especially sports betting, which people view because the sports are entertainment and typically considered to be a positive, right? Most people view athletics and sports as a positive for society. Because of that, the ancillary is sports betting, and that has not gotten the negative stigma, but it's destroying relationships and finances across the country. Sports betting is one of the worst things we've introduced to society recently, but that tends to be more of a male-dominated version of the infidelity. Females tend to, and I'm going to use the word lie, and I use that term without derogatory meaning to it, just being deceitful about clothing and food, which is interesting. I'm not really sure what the food situation's all about. Maybe going out to eat and not telling someone? I'm not sure there, but those tend to be the two things that they are deceitful about. Just leads us into understanding that the way we value different things in our lives doesn't change even when we're being sort of dishonest about it. Technology and sort of entertainment in the form of gambling tend to be more male dominated areas anyways, and food and clothing tend to be more female dominated areas of society in a general sense. Very much stereotyping across the board there. I also want to be really clear as we enter this discussion that there is a difference between privacy and secrecy. In a relationship, it is normal, healthy, completely understandable for each partner to have privacy, to understand that if you want to spend some money on this and I want to spend money on this, the way it gets done is fine. If I'm trying to buy you a gift, right, privacy obviously makes sense. It'd be completely illogical for us to share the gifts we're buying for each other ahead of time. I mentioned in previous videos when we talked about allowances for each partner that I think it's a really powerful tool to avoid a lot of discussions about utility, a lot of arguments that we may get into where we just agree on an allowance. Well, if that's the case, part of implicit to that allowance is that you're allowed to do with that money what you'd like to do with it. And so if we agree that it's $75 a week for each of us to have as, fun money, if you will, then okay, that simply means that that money has been designated for you to do what you want with it. You can be private with that. If you want to go out to eat or you want to buy a new pair of shoes or whatever, it's totally irrelevant to me because we've agreed on the dollar figure. That's different than secrecy, where you are intentionally withholding information or not disclosing the full information, or just being deceitful about the way you're spending money or whatever the case is. And this can play out in so many different ways across our relationships. I know families where the one spouse will want to buy gifts for the children and the other spouse doesn't agree with the amount being spent on the gifts. Maybe let's say it's Christmas or something like that. And so the one spouse that wants to buy more gifts will purchase them and then literally hide them like in the car trunk or something along those lines until the other spouse is not around, and then slowly introduce those gifts in a way that it doesn't come out that there was a lot more money spent on them than there should have been, or it maybe was agreed upon. That is infidelity. That is keeping secrets or essentially lying to your partner in a way that they would not have agreed with had you simply disclosed it. And so I'm not saying that one was right or the other in terms of should you have spent more on Christmas. That's for the couple to discuss, but you didn't discuss it. You unilaterally made a decision that you knew the other partner did not agree with. That's problematic. We often see situations where one partner will continue to fund the lifestyle of a grown child or a parent without the knowledge or approval or acceptance of the other partner. And so you'll have grown children who are obviously intelligent people. They know how to manipulate the system to their benefit. So they will go to one parent, the one that they know will give them money, even though the partners may have in the open agreed that we're done supporting this child. They need to float on their own. And yet one parent breaks that trust and continues to support the child. And so you can start to see the dynamics that come into play when these types of things happen. In that particular scenario, you have now affected two different relationships because the child who is going to one parent for support that was not approved by the family has now created a block between themselves and the other parent who does not know what's going on. And they're viewing as that parent is not being supportive of me. And so as the parent who is trying to help or is trying to give money to the child, I have unintentionally caused a major block between my partner and my child, my spouse and the child, whatever the case may be. So those can be really problematic. Same thing with a parent. If I decide to support one of my elderly parents with money and I do not tell my partner, I do not get their permission, we don't even discuss it, they don't know about it, and I perhaps think they would not necessarily agree with it, if or when that comes out, it's going to be a massive problem and we're going to inevitably fight about it. And it won't even be about the topic of supporting the parent. It will be about the fact you did not stick to our agreement. You broke the trust of the relationship. And that's the other piece that I want to highlight for today is that as we talk through these things, it's important to understand that financial infidelity can be as destructive, or in some cases more destructive, than what we would traditionally think of as infidelity. When you have what we would typically consider an affair or something along those lines, yes, it's a breach of trust, clearly, and that's horrible for any relationship, no question about that. But it stops with the physical side of it and in the emotional side. There's all these factors that go into infidelity, but the relationship itself, the marriage, is not damaged from a material perspective. You don't lose your house, you don't lose your cars, you still get to pay for your kids' sports, right? All these things that are happening in your life can continue to happen. When financial infidelity comes into play, that's not true. You have not only the breach of trust and the damage to the relationship between the two partners, but you also potentially have severe damage to the financial resources of the couple. So you're having a secondary damage. It's not just that you betrayed my trust. You also may have cost us our house if your gambling addiction is out of control. There's all these factors that are additional in play when it's a money cheating. And so we have to be really conscious of that. Again, I am certainly in no way saying that this is worse than having the traditional style of affair. They're both awful. So I'm not condoning or supporting either one, but just understand that this can be very different. This is a different style of cheating, but it has the same emotional damage components in play. So we have to be very aware of that and understand what can happen. The other piece that starts to come into play when there is financial infidelity in a relationship, as it leaks out, as the partner who is being abused starts to understand or has any inclination of this, you're not only increasing their emotional anxiety, you now start to ramp up the financial anxiety. If I start to come to an understanding that my partner is spending more on clothing, food, gambling, it doesn't matter, anything that they're doing that we have not agreed upon, I not only start to have a ton of anxiety around our relationship and the trust factor, now I have an added concern of, can we actually continue to maintain our lifestyle? And so even the part of the life that I am in agreement with and that I'm supporting could be in jeopardy because you are starting to drain resources from that side of it as well. So this becomes a double-edged sword for the person who's a victim of it. This is an area that we really want to have honest discussions about. And we want to understand how often it's happening and the fact that it can be severe. Now, like anything else, it is a scale that should be pretty clear. There is the very, very minor things. You went and, you bought one of your kids, you took one out for ice cream and didn't really ask and didn't really have a discussion. It's like, okay, no big deal. Who cares? In fact, proper budgeting could have solved a lot of that. You could just build that kind of fun stuff in and it wouldn't be a big deal. But that's like really super minor and probably not even considered a breach of trust. And the spouses will just joke about it. Okay. All the way up to the really severe ones where you are living a double life and you are supporting a completely different family, or you have, a mistress who you're funneling money to. So it's not only a physical affair, you've now moved it into a financial affair. Those kind of things can be clearly very different and on the scale from next to nothing all the way up to catastrophic. So there is this area that we have to, a sliding scale, we have to adjust for as we talk about this. And that part of it is where sometimes you need to seek some help because you want to have a clear picture of what's happening. So what we will discuss during the second episode of this series is diving into the other side. How do we recognize when this is happening? If we find out it has happened and we want to repair the relationship, it's not so catastrophic that it's a game ender, and we both parties want to try to put it back together, what are some steps that we can take? What are some tools we can do ahead of time to help avoid this from ever happening in the first place? And finally, I want to touch on, are there things we can teach our kids so that in the future they have far less likelihood of this happening in their lives? Is there steps we can take as they're growing up to prepare them for more healthy relationships financially when they finally do enter that phase of their life? So we'll talk through a lot of those things in episode 2. And again, I want you to just give some time and thought over the next week about, are there things in your life where you're perhaps not being entirely honest with your partner? And if that's true, then perhaps don't try to take the steps this week. Maybe come back next week's episode and give a listen to how you can take some steps to begin repairing that and be proactive about fixing it, and understanding that I may not have even been doing this intentionally. This was not meant in any way to be nefarious or destructive. I apologize. And are there steps we can take to fix it? So just this week, my ask of you is take some time, think it through. Are there any areas where you perhaps are doing something you're not entirely sure your partner would be on board with, or you just really don't know? So give some thought to that as we go. Otherwise, have a wonderful week. I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you again next week for the second part of the series.